All right, so let's start the process of creating UVs with the simplest one, maybe the cube. Let's see what is there to fix. All right, so as I mentioned in the document and in the previous videos, what are the things that we need to check? And at this point, I'm looking at my UV diagram. Okay, I need to check the problems. What would be the problems? Like the checker pattern not showing up correctly would be one, but here I don't see any issues in that regard. And so the final stage is to lay out the UV so that it is within the 0 and 1 space of the UV space. And that is not done because you can see that a little bit of that UV is expanded on the, you know, other parts of the UV space. So I need to address that. So what I can do is that I can here go to my UV shells, right click UV shell, or you can just click on this, okay? UV shell, okay, that's a UV shell, and then hit R on the keyboard. All the transformation tools, they also work in the UV space, okay? So R for scale it down, you see that that one disappeared. It means that now the UV is in a correct, like, within the 0 and 1 space. And that's our layout, okay? Nice. And here, that's probably like a little bit easier to see the UVs and the pattern that is underneath that. If you click on this icon, it will dim down your texture and you can see your UVs better. Okay, this is great. Well, there is one thing that you need to remember to do before you start the UV process. Well, for this one, the cube already comes with a correct UV, so it's wasn't a big issue. But scrolling down on my document and on the UV steps, I see that the first line reads, prepare the model, delete history and freeze transformation on the geometries you want to UV. Well, this is, again, one of those things that if you don't do, then your on-full 3D is not going to work correctly sometimes, and it will give you headaches. You're just going to go through the process. It's not going to work, and you're going to go crazy. Well, then the answer would be like, delete history and freeze transformation. That's crazy, I know, but it matters for creating the UV. So let's just go ahead and do that in the object mode. I'm just going to select all the objects. If this texture is distracting as you're working with the objects, you can just, check that off. I'm going to select all my objects, and then I will delete history and then freeze transformation for that. That's the first step, okay? So box checked. The checker icon works perfectly, awesome and nice. And I'm also going to maybe close my outliner. I don't need it. All right, so let's move on to this one. What is the thing that we can do for this one? Well, I mentioned that the top and bottom work, they work perfectly and they work very nice. And if I actually go to my UV toolkit and just want to check out what are the shells for this UV, I can see that there are 3 shells. And these 2 shells are actually working nicely. So what I can do is that maybe I can select these 2, holding down Shift on my keyboard, then push them to the side just for the time being, okay? And then I'm just going to start working on this one. So what is the first step of UV creation? Project an image of the geometry from the 3D space onto the UV space. Well, I will start doing that. So to project an image, we need to go to Create. Okay, so that's the submenu that we're going to work on. The first thing, if we want to start UVing, basically what you do is that you can think of it as like taking a picture of your 3D object to give yourself a starting point. Okay, so to create the first UV set, you can either be in the object mode or in the face mode. So you can either select the object and do any of these projections, or you can select faces. What is the difference? Well, for this one, it's probably best if you just keep these 2 that are working to the side and just select faces. You don't want to recreate the UVs that are already working. Okay, so I will go to face mode. I can also click on this, right? So this is the same. And then I will select all those faces, all right? And we can do actually any of these projections. These are like basically different types of projecting this, or let's just call this taking a picture of your 3D object and put that image into the UV space, okay? So we can use any of those. I almost always start with the planar. So let's just go ahead and do that. I mean, like even if it's like a cylindrical or spherical object, I always like to use the planar one because I never rely on what the create gives me for the UVs. I will always need to cut and unfold the way that I want it. So that's why I rather start with the planar. Okay. So let's just use this planar projection to see what it gives us. Before we actually just click on it, let's just check the options for that by clicking, holding down Shift, and then click on the planar. Okay. All right. See, we have here, so project from. This is basically the direction that you're going to take that image. All right. So I can see that Y is not going to be any good. If I take an image like this, is it going to give me anything from the sides? No. All right. So maybe the best way to project would be to project from maybe Z direction or X direction. Okay. I will go with Z. So I will check Z here and hit apply. And there you go. You have your projection into this space, right? It just took a picture from this direction from the faces that I had selected. All right. So first step done. The projection is there. So I'm just going to scale it down just a little bit. Okay. What's the next step? Step 2 reads cut and sew, and I need to be on the, select some edges for that. So we'll just go ahead and do that. So why is this step necessary? Because if you don't cut the correct edges, when you say unfold, it's like, okay, I will just do whatever. I don't know how you want this to be cut. Then I guess I will just put it under a press and make it flat. And that's not going to work. So that's why you need to make the correct cuts before you actually unfold. Okay, so I'm going to look here and you can see that as I select edges or faces, you can see that they are being highlighted in the UV space as well. So let's say at this point, I think, so whenever you want to cut the edges, you need to think about where you want to put the seams and should know about what the seams are if you have watched the tutorials that you were supposed to watch for today. So I'm going to hide the seam in the back here. Doesn't matter for this one, but let's say that this is where I want the texture to have the seam, okay? So that's going to be where I want to cut this geometry. So I need to go to, I'm going to collapse this one and then go to cut and sew and select the edge, only that edge. If you see like any other edges, if you just maybe, I don't know, double click and you see that, see how there are other edges selected, you need to subtract those selections so that the only edge that you want to be cut is selected. So if that happens, you can hold down Alt and then drag a selection over the edges that you don't want and make sure that you only selected the edges that you want to be cut. In this case, it's just this one edge. And I hit cut, okay? So now what I can do is that I can move on to the next step, which is unfold. Let's just lay this flat, see what we get. You should either be in the UV shell or face mode. I'm just going to go to the UV shell. Okay, click on this, or you can just right click and go to UV shell. Select the shell, and then I will go to unfold. Let's just go to unfold options by holding down shift and clicking on it. Make sure that it is on unfold 3D. Everything else should be fine. I'm just going to reset my settings. Okay, and hit apply. Voila, now that image, now that faces that we selected, they are laid out correctly. How do I know? Because the checker texture is showing up correctly on the side and at the top, right? So you can see that these are squares now, and I also rotated them. You shall. I also rotated them. They were just like this, and it was like all in an angle. So I rotated them so that they are straight, and now I have the correct UVs. Voila! So at this point, you can see that the size of the squares are not matching for these three shells. That's fine. We're gonna address that when we create UVs. Okay. All right, so that is correct and ready to go to move on to the next step, which is arrange and layout. Organize the UV shells to lay them out within the 0 to 1 unit in the UV space. So we're going to go to Arrange and Layout. And here we're going to do layout. But before we click on this icon, we need to make some adjustment to the setting as it is instructed in the PDF. So I'm just going to hold down Shift, click on that, and I will do exactly what it says in the PDF. I'm just going to reset my setting so that we all see the same thing. I need to go to Shell Pre-Rotation. Where are you? Okay, shell pre-rotation, and I will say align X to V. This ensures that when you lay out your UVs, um, like anything that is kind of laid out vertically on the ground and it's like perpendicular to the ground, like these faces, they're going to align themselves with the V axis in the UV space, which is like this axis. Okay, so to make sure that it is not laid out like this, for example. Okay, so we fix that, and then shell pre-scaling. So this is very important to make sure that it is on preserved 3D ratios. Okay, when you have that turned on, then that issue that we noticed with the cubes kind of looking a little bit smaller on the faces on the side and a little bit bigger at the top, that's going to be addressed because the ratio of the 3D space is going to be preserved when you lay out your UV. So we're going to make sure that we are in that option also. And the shell padding, that's also something that I would like to have as like, 5 pixels, because let's say you want to start using these UV maps and create your own textures in Photoshop. It's going to be helpful is if those UV shells are not like very adjacent to each other and there's a little bit of space between them. That would be much easier to paint the texture in Photoshop if you have that turned on. Okay, and then I will hit, maybe I just apply. Well, because I had only that one shell selected, it's now only applied to that shell, but that's fine. Now that I have the setting, I can just, select all those shells and then hit layout one more time. And now I can see that it is laid out correctly. I see that this goes a little bit beyond the 0, 1 because that one is like showing up. So what I can do is that I can maybe, and at this point, if you want to scale anything after the layout, scale all of them together so that the proportions are not changed. You can see that here all the patterns are showing up with the correct proportion at the top and at the bottom. So to keep and preserve that, we're just going to scale everything together, and then that is correct. And at this point, if you want to move them around a little bit, for example, again, if you want to paint the texture in Photoshop and you need a little bit of space between these shells, you can just do that, move them. But if you want to scale them, it's best if you scale them all together, okay? So this is the scenario where everything goes smoothly, okay? In the next video, I'm going to show you what's going to happen if you don't make the correct cuts and what are the issues that you might run into, okay? I will see you in the next tutorial.